From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Thank you for joining the McLaughlin Group, a show where friends disagree agreeably. I'm your host, Tom Rogan. This week's panelists are author and columnist Pat Buchanan, columnist Eleanor Clift of the Daily Beast, columnist Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune, and the writer and author John Schindler. Okay, let's get to issue 1, impeachment fight.
There was absolutely no pressure put on him. There was no quid pro quo at all. And if you look at this whistleblowers, which I have a lot of respect for whistleblowers, but only when they're real, his report of the phone call was totally different than the fact.
Democrats have no ground for impeaching me. That was President Trump's narrative this week as he pushed back against a Democratic Party impeachment inquiry, believing the president illegally pressured Ukraine to investigate his prospective 2020 presidential challenger, Joe Biden. Democrats are gathering evidence towards impeachment, but it's not yet clear what evidence they have found or that they'll get. After all, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is refusing to allow the State Department staff to testify to congressional investigators. Instead, some Republicans are supporting Trump's demand that Ukraine and China investigate Biden and his son Hunter for corruption.
Pat, what new did we learn this week?
Game on is what we learned this week. The president on Friday said he told Nancy Pelosi basically, look, you're going to have to do this the right way, an impeachment inquiry voted by the full House, or I'm not cooperating with you. I think that's going to have to be done. But secondly, the president came out and was defiant and daring. He said Joe Biden and Hunter Biden are stone cold crooked. They, cheated in the Ukraine, getting $50,000 a month for Hunter Biden when he was the chief of running down corruption. Joe was. That Hunter got $1 billion from the Chinese. He wants the Ukrainians and the Chinese to investigate it. And he said it's not only legitimate, it may be my obligation. As I said, it's game on.
All right, Eleanor.
The grand old party is living on the fumes of discredited conspiracy theories. Everything you just said about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden has been disproved. Nancy Pelosi several weeks ago said that this president is self-impeaching, and we saw that on full display when he was at a press conference, basically calling upon China to investigate the Bidens in the midst of ongoing trade talks with China. And the president is saying, if they don't do what we want them to do, I have a lot of power. This is a conflation of presidential prerogatives with personal electoral benefit that is clearly ripe for impeachment. And I think the facts are going to drive this, and we just saw some text messages between the acting envoy to Ukraine, who resigned in order to be able to speak, Kurt Volker, and the acting ambassador in Ukraine, William Taylor, who says at one point, if we're talking about exchanging a statement from Ukraine saying they're going to investigate the Bidens with the promise of military weapons, I'm out of it. I'm quitting. And there's evidence is coming out. There's more whistleblowers evidently waiting in the wings. I mean, this story is moving very quickly, and the president's behavior at that press conference, he's coming across as totally unhinged.
John?
Yeah, I mean, this is Trump off the leash. This is Trump at his most Trumpy. There is clearly no one in the White House who anymore has any ability to tell him to stop acting this way in public. And look, Trump's biggest problem right now is Trump. If the president could stay off Twitter for a while, could limit his public comments to things in Earth orbit, he would survive.
But Pat would suggest, though, that he needs to get out there to mobilize his base to defend him.
He does need to mobilize his base, and I don't think we should underestimate that the Biden is a crook, Biden is the swamp narrative is going to sell well with Trump's base. But that's not in the end going to distract from the meat of the Ukraine story, which is deeply enmeshed with Rudy Giuliani and in effect running a parallel State Department around Rudy Giuliani for dealings ultimately with Moscow. And that's going to all come out, and that's going to change the game when it all comes
Clarence,
out.
and then we'll let Pat defend the president a bit.
Mobilizing his base is Donald Trump's least problem. I mean, look at all the scandals that he's been through, and the numbers haven't moved much. He still gets about 40% support. That's not enough to win an election unless you're really lucky about having votes in the right states. But he doesn't seem to care about expanding that base. He cares about hanging on to them. But the problem is all this other stuff is going on now. You've got whistleblowers. You've got a lot of discontented people, including a lot of discontented Republicans looking for a chance to scuttle him without splashing back on themselves. And you can see Trump's frustration in his behavior. When he goes on a Twitter binge, I think he exceeded his own records this past week. When you see him doing that without expanding in any way toward the truth, toward facts, but giving us more legend, more conspiracy theories, that shows you he's in trouble, getting deeper.
What Trump is that he's a New York real estate dealer and builder who does deals. Look, you do this for me and I'll do that for you. If you don't cooperate with me, why should I cooperate with you? So what he's saying basically, let's take the president of Ukraine. You want a meeting in the White House, you got it. But I'd like some help on this corrupt situation that involves the two Bidens over there. I'd like to see that investigated. I want the truth to come out about what they did. Eleanor says it's all just fine. I think it's killing Biden, quite frankly. And what I think is the American people will say, well, guy, he's doing the job a president should do. He's tough. He's doing deals. That's what he came here to do.
What about the law,
We're
Pat?
behind him.
What about the law?
But see, this is just it.
Going to foreign countries
you guys
to
are in
support
all
your
this
campaign,
fog
does that
of
trouble you
petty
at all?
fog, and Trump has done 1,000 things that justify impeachment, according to the liberals who write all this stuff.
But does that trouble you at all, going overseas for help on scuttling your candidate, your opponent here in the U.S.? That's what Trump is doing now.
Would you have done this when you were running for president?
Look, in the JFK assassination, I think the United States demanded of the Russians and everybody else every single thing you've got about Lee Harvey Oswald and the rest of it, and we're justified in doing it. Trump is asserting something.
Would you do this?
Well, wait a second.
I'm not a New York builder.
Okay. All right, Eleanor.
Yeah, he's asserting this in order to benefit himself electorally. He's not doing it for foreign policy. You know, in foreign policy, you have linkage. You have linkage between different issues in foreign policy, but you don't have linkage between your re-election. I mean, this is totally out of bounds.
Has made very clear there is no dirt of a criminal nature on Joe or Hunter Biden. As always is the case in our wonderful republic, what is the scandal here is what's legal. Right. And that Hunter Biden really was cashing in a really gross, disgusting kind of way that shouldn't happen, but happens all the time. There is no underlying crime here.
That hurts Joe Biden, but it's well known now.
Absolutely.
And it's not illegal.
Yeah.
And Trump needs to try harder. You want to get dirt on your
opponent.
Wait. It is a familiar Republican tactic where you go after the other guy's strength. This reminds me of the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth going after John Kerry, a decorated war veteran, while the Republican candidate had dodged service.
Who won the election?
Well, it reminds me of
Obama's
birth certificate, as I said last week.
All right, let's bring Pat in, because we only have...
I mean, look, with regard to... Look, there is... Now, Joe Biden said, I never talked to my son about his business deals and all the rest of it. You got pictures of him with John Kerry's stepson and Hunter and all the rest of it.
But not evidence.
And everybody here in this panel says, look, the Ukrainians have said there's nothing to it. Why should he believe that? I mean, you all are just automatically.
Well, let me answer, John. I'm going to ask. Wait. 1 second. I'm the moderator. John.
Yes.
Is the China side slightly more problematic for the
Absolutely.
Bidens? Because Hunter went on official visit.
He was there on an official junket.
Getting money.
Clearly soliciting. This is the kind of scuzzy
And the
stuff.
Chinese know quid pro quo.
Absolutely. And there's the kind of scuzzy stuff that the Trump kids do all the time and are rightly called out for.
What is wrong with asking the Chinese to help us on that?
What?
What is wrong with
Trump's? Do
you
trust the Chi-Coms? Do you trust the Chi-Coms?
Were you just saying you think something was done wrong, and we just ask him? Did Hunter ask for that money? Who asked for
Clarence?
I was just saying, this reminds me of the Obama birth certificate and Hillary Clinton's emails and blah, blah, blah. This is standard Trump playbook to distract you toward a side issue, and then long after the election you discover, hey, we
all right, enough. Concluding comment. President Trump will be safe unless they can prove a quid pro quo. Issue 2, Kim's ballistic message.
Following a brief June visit to North Korea, it seemed that President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un might renew stalled negotiations over the latter's nuclear weapons program. It was not to be. Until this week, that is, when the two sides announced that working-level talks will recommence this weekend. But should we expect progress? Well, no, if North Korea's latest ballistic missile test is any indication. After all, the US and South Korea believe a North Korean at-sea barge or underwater platform successfully launched a short-range ballistic missile this week. Impacting the Sea of Japan, the missile shows North Korea's developing submarine-launched ballistic missile capability and Kim's continuing penchant for brinksmanship.
Eleanor, what is the state of President Trump's diplomacy with North Korea?
Well, the North Koreans have launched this underwater missile. Some question whether it was really effective, but they're basically trying to up the pressure on the president, who they know wants a deal. But they have a little favor they'd like to ask now.
Sounds familiar.
Exactly. And so they're putting the pressure on the president because he wants a deal and they want to try to get the best of their deal. And if you're a legitimate diplomat or a foreign policy expert, you're going to look at this and understand that it is a total sham.
Denuclearization, 100%, is not going to occur. The North Koreans aren't giving up the weapons that are their only deterrent from the Americans doing to them what they did to Saddam Hussein and Colonel Gaddafi. I do think Trump wants a deal. My guess is they very probably will accept a partial denuclearization. But I'll tell you, Tom, in the longer run, what they want, North Koreans want, is the Americans out of Korea, an end to the U.S. treaty with South Korea, and they want the same thing the Chinese want, which is the Americans out of their region.
John?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. The only area I would dissent is, Pat said, 100% denuclearization is not going to happen. No, 1% is not going to happen. Right. As John Bolton made clear recently, he was exactly right, former national security advisor, saying this is just not on the table for them.
So what do you do? Do you bomb them?
No, absolutely not.
You accept
That's crazy. You have to accept they are nuclear powered. They have been a nuclear
with
power for several
ICBMs.
years. That is a different issue.
I hit the ICBMs.
That has to be on
right.
the table, but we're not there yet,
Okay.
and that's the point. And Bolton is too aggressive on that issue, but we are not going to do anything unilaterally here, nor should we. The North Korean problem ultimately is manageable, but Trump's love letters and faking concessions and this whole charade has seriously undermined our position. I think we need to be frank about this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if anything, the future lies in North Korea's relations with South Korea and the kind of openings they're trying to get toward economic trade. That's the kind of thing that really helps you to deal with a regime in a way that helps you to undermine their basic ideological underpinnings. But we're a long way from that too.
Well, it's another.
Pat, let's bring back to Pat, and then I'll come to.
Let me say this: the North Koreans now have nuclear missiles, nuclear-armed missiles that can blanket South Korea. It can hit Japan.
Hit the United States.
The United States will not allow an ICBM land-based missile in North Korea, I don't think. But I do think that if the United States cuts a partial deal, the Japanese and the South Koreans are going to have to look at their own nuclear arsenals.
Eleanor?
Yeah. It's another test of President Trump's ability to flood the zone with his version of the truth, which is frequently a lie. And I think our allies, South Korea and Japan, are rightfully concerned about how much he'll give away in order to make himself look good.
Pat, you mentioned there that the United States would not accept an ICBM with the nuclear warhead. Would you support President Trump or a future president using military force to destroy the ICBM program or degrade it?
Well, that's a tough call because you could get a nuclear attack back if you do something like that.
But would you?
No, if they start putting ICBMs in silos or putting them on pads, I would be very tempted as president to strike those long-range missiles.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably. And the good news here is our intelligence warning on that would be pretty considerable. You can't build large ICBM bases without us noticing.
That would be insane for them to do.
Yeah, it actually would. However, let me say something. I think as delusional as Trump is on this, the D.C. foreign policy establishment, in a bipartisan sense, has been delusional about North Korea for a long time, really lowballing what this regime is about. And Pat is correct. This is regime survival for them. It's family survival. This is a communist regime in name only. It's a bizarre, hyper-nationalist family firm. And they're not giving this up. So we're not talking them out of this, no matter
Trump
what.
is chasing a deal that
Absolutely.
will
never happen.
Will never happen.
Would President Clift use military force?
I think long and hard before I would use military force.
We're not.
Well,
it has to be on the table, Eleanor. It has to be.
there would be more justification there than certainly the Bush administration had going into Iraq.
Right.
And so,
Clarence?
Yeah, it has to be on the table, but it would be insane to actually get into that kind of an escalating process, because once you start a war, and that's a warlike move, you never know where it's going to end up. But you've got to have those bargaining chips out there.
I'll tell you what we will not do. I mean, we put 333,000 guys in Korea from 1950 to 53. We ain't sending an army like that over there to defend South Korea again, I'm telling you.
Well, the good news is we don't need to.
Yeah. Could a potential be, though, as a concluding comment here, that the United States would get North Korea to put in potentially its nuclear warheads in a silo controlled by the IAEA, which they would essentially could get into to bring it out. So you'd have deterrence, but we would have safety.
The Trump plan, and maybe it's the only realistic thing here, is to have Trump hotels and turn them into a resort paradise, frankly, and economic, and really
you got more confidence
turning their economy into something that is really a powerhouse seems to me might be an incentive someday.
Kim is not going to see all his warheads put under somebody else's control.
Okay.
Well,
but perhaps the gaudy gold of the Trump hotels would be better than nuclear war. Anyway,
Right.
issue 3,
Go for
a
it.
red birthday.
Celebrating Communist China's 70th birthday this week, a parade of hypersonic vehicles joined long-range anti-ship, anti-surface and anti-air weapons in a simple message to the world. In 2019 China, Mao Zedong's adage is alive and well. Every communist must grasp the truth, said Communist China's founding father. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. But in 2019, the party's gun is targeted outwards as well as inwards. Determined to displace the US-led democratic international order with an order of Chinese feudal mercantilism, President Xi Jinping is investing heavily in long-range weapons and advanced military capabilities. And from Hong Kong to Huawei, the South China Sea to San Francisco, China is showing a willingness to steal, trample, or seize opportunities to build its power.
Clarence, aside from Pat's rejoinder about my pronunciation of mercantilism, do you think the United States is in a new Cold War with China?
Oh, but that's an interesting way to put it. I don't think it's hard to look at the Russia model of a Cold War and say that's what's happening with China, because our relations are so friendly on the economic level and the trade level. But everybody knows where the demographics are going and the economies are going. China is growing into the world's biggest economic power, and they must be reckoned with. At the same time, we don't want to get too involved on that side of the globe. But we've always been, there are a number of trouble spots there in the islands near China, which we've always hoped would not become a real tinderbox, and that possibility is always there.
John?
Look, the rise of China to great power status is the most important fact of the 21st century, whether people want to admit this or not. I don't know that the Cold War is a good model, since there's not much ideological competition here, but there's a great deal of competition on every other level. And we are on a collision course. It doesn't have to be war, but I want to stress that the U.S. Navy has been dominant in the Western Pacific since we won at Manila Bay well over a century ago. So this is not going to go away easily. And China's rise has so far been relatively peaceful. I don't know it's going to continue that way. And the problem is China watchers fall easily into China is 10 feet tall, or it's a corrupt mess, they're all falling apart. And of course, that's all true at the same time.
One advantage we have, though, Pat, is the demographics. The Chinese demographics, that's an aging population.
Well,
we're a young population.
There are 1.4 billion people, too, which is 4 times as many as the United States. And if the GDP per capita rises from 10,000 a year to 15,000, they got a larger economy than we do. But here's the situation with China. China wants to be the dominant power politically, ideologically, militarily in the world. They want to displace the United States. They want to avoid the Thucydides trap, Britain and Germany killing each other. And I think, good luck with that. It better be good luck for both countries. Nuclear war or war with China, it seems to me, would be insanity. But there's no doubt that their objective is to drive us away from those first chain of islands, Japan, Taiwan, back across into our side of the Pacific Ocean over a long period of time. I think they're going to do it peacefully, but there's going to be bumps.
Well, the talk here is about the military confrontation, when I think economic competition is what we're in the midst of, and the president is embarking on this trade war, which is really hurting American farmers and hurting American business and eventually American consumers. And China's got problems of its own. We can't talk about China without mentioning Hong Kong and the fact that they used a live round for the first time on an 18-year-old demonstrator. And what the people in Hong Kong wanted, it's been 4 months now of protests, they want the right to vote for the person who's going to lead them. And I think China's going to have to give in on that. Because
or send the army in.
That would be a big mistake. I don't think they're looking for that.
If push came to shove and Hong Kong wanted to go independent, and its revolution there in Hong Kong looks more like ours than China's. If Hong Kong pushes this, does China really have an option other than to go in and crack down if they want to hold on to Hong Kong?
They don't. Yep. And the demographic thing is really interesting because we look at it as aging population. You know, the PRC just turned 70. This is the most murderous regime in human history. It killed more people than Hitler and Stalin combined. But they have an enormous strength, which is that they are over 90% Han Chinese. They do not believe diversity is their strength. They crush their ethnic minorities. They have, frankly, a very intelligent, highly educated, hardworking population. And this is a fundamental challenge.
Is there an opportunity for the United States, though, in that, regardless of the trade conflict, with Xi Jinping's potentially not masterstroke plan to centralize economic planning in the old Mao way, that you destroy capital?
The real issue is, should we decouple from China economically, and in other words, go to this Cold War route, or should we try to stay engaged, even given the fact that this is a malevolent, as John said.
Well, what should we do?
We should stay engaged.
I think we should stay engaged.
Speaking of demographic changes, just very briefly, speaking of demographic changes, their middle class is over 300 million people, bigger than the total population of the United States, and that benefits us. It benefits them. We've been mortgaging our debt to them for decades.
It benefits them only if they can continue growing, though. They have a big problem if they can't give those people
mutual
living
growth
standards.
is what this should be all about.
President Trump likes his chocolate cake diplomacy with President Xi at Mar-a-Lago, and they each need a trade deal. Yeah. So I think they're going to resolve things peacefully. The president needs a deal before November 2020, and he's going to get one, and he's going to say it's perfect, no matter how flawed it is, and beautiful.
There is the synergy between Hong Kong, the trade deal, the complexity here, and the ability of both powers to have profound impact. I mean, it's going to be interesting with the election, where Democrats increasingly stand, but also how much President Trump is willing, because I think you're right, Eleanor, he needs that deal. Will he give the Chinese what they want in terms of technology, Huawei access, which is their big spike?
This is huge, and we are trying now to deal with the fact that a lot of the world has outsourced their telecommunications to what amounts to the People's Liberation Army. And on this, the Trump administration, I have to say, is exactly right. The pushback has been long overdue. I also want to say, looking to 2020, we are hearing almost nothing out of the Democratic candidates about foreign policy at all, much less this fundamental challenge. And Joe Biden may be shaky on China.
Because we aren't hearing anything from the voters about foreign policy. The voters want to hear about health care and other domestic issues right now, and that's just the reality of the election.
Politicians have to lead sometimes. I mean, I agree with you. I agree. It's not a top 5 issue, but it needs to be. There's a fundamental
challenge. 4 months until Iowa. They'll get into it.
They better.
Warren or Biden? Who's going to be the one?
Oh, well, listen, I think Joe is damaged goods. I don't see how he can go through 4 months of arguing back and forth on what Hunter did and all that. And that's
Pat's with Warren. Who are you with?
I want Biden. I'm not making a prediction at this point.
Okay. Eleanor?
I'm going to let the voters decide. I think Biden is a better candidate to defeat Trump.
Yep. We have known knowns and unknown knowns here, but my money's still on Biden to do it. I don't think this will be as damaging as we think. Biden's doing what Trump does, which is just shine it on.
I would agree, and your kid got some favors. Trump is not exactly the best messenger
predictions,
on that.
Predictions. I think it's going to be Warren, but predictions.
I think Bibi's going to be indicted.
Okay.
Bibi Netanyahu.
Wow. All right.
Predictions, I'm going to go back to the impeachment saga, and Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, bald-faced lying that he didn't know anything about that July 25th phone call when he was on the on the call. And then Vice President Pence, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. His national security advisor was on the phone. He's met with the Ukrainian president. The prediction is that he is getting ensnared in this, and the president himself is calling out Pence because he wants Republicans to know that, hey, if Trump goes down, so does Pence. You might get Nancy Pelosi as president.
Right.
It's fantasy, but I can enjoy it for now.
Okay, John.
That's right about Bibi getting indicted. It's coming. Second, it's going to be an extraordinarily interesting day on Twitter when it becomes publicly revealed and Donald Trump has to confront the fact that the person behind a lot of the current highly damaging leaks to the White House is John Bolton.
Okay, interesting. Clarence.
I think the vaping controversy, which is now in Massachusetts, is going to court and cause a panic across the country. As more research is done, as it should be, we're going to find that it's really the people who are getting sick or dying are buying bootleg vapes and not the commercial types. And that'll be more carefully regulated.
Didn't I see you with e-cigarettes a little while ago?
Yes, I vaped in order to quit smoking, and it worked.
Okay. On that light note, I predict that the Chinese People's Liberation Army will be ordered into Hong Kong. She cares more about the prospect of ensuring the party's dominance than he does about the potential damage that sending the military would do. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you next time.